So you've never heard of Rogue Trooper, huh? I mean, fair enough. This video is actually partly inspired by my friend Diego over at Diego Reviews. We had a chat not too long ago where he was like, well, I'm familiar with like this PS2 game that came out and there was a remaster of that. And I know that there's a film, but I'm not really familiar with this character. And I thought, well, there you go. That's the perfect excuse. That's all I need to talk about actually my favourite 2000 AD character. Rogue Trooper is the last of the genetic infantrymen. Futuristic super soldiers, genetically engineered specifically to survive in the toxic atmosphere of New Earth. And that's NU new, like new image or new metal. It's not just that he's a blue, shirtless clone trooper, but he's also got a talking gun, a talking helmet, and a talking backpack with the souls of his dead mates in them. It is a very strange science fiction take on a war comic. First appearing in Prog 229 in September 1981, Rogue Trooper was created by Dave Gibbons and Jerry Finley-Day. For those who haven't seen my previous videos, 2000 AD issues are called progs, which is short for program. This is because the comic debuted in the late 1970s and computers, specifically home computers, were very cutting edge and very current. And a way for 2000 AD to sound really current and exciting, and frankly a little bit futuristic, they decided to name their issues programs, which got shortened to progs. Dave Gibbons was a prolific artist in British comics, and these Rogue Trooper strips are some of the tightest comic art you will ever see, British or not. His control, his composition, this is classic Gibbons, it's mathematically perfect. Jerry Finley-Day is a Scottish comics writer with a long, storied career. The main bulk of the work that he's most famous for is these war comics from the 1970s. Stuff like The Rat Pack and Cold Steel for battle, Hellman of Hammerforce for action. He wrote Invasion and Fiends of the Eastern Front for 2000 AD, two classic storylines, one of which I appeared on the 2000 AD podcast talking about, so you should go and check that out. At the beginning of the 80s, Jerry Finley-Day was well within his comfort zone. Zhuzhing it up a bit by setting it in space, Rogue Trooper feels like an evolution of the work he'd done in those 70s comics. New Earth has had a civil war raging on it for decades. Both sides in this conflict are committing horrible war crimes and atrocities. They've both destroyed New Earth with atomic, biological and chemical weapons. The wormhole above New Earth, bringing countless reinforcements, shines down like a black sun over a planet turned to glass by atomics.
'Tis a barren wasteland, riddled with fire and ash and dust. The very air you breathe is a poisonous fume.
What GFD is doing here is he's giving us a mix of recognisable real-world wars that we can draw context from and then project back onto the narrative. So what we have here is a combination of both world wars, a little bit of the Cold War, and I think a little bit of sprinkling of Vietnam, and most importantly, the American Civil War. So something that JFD does here right from the off is he inverts the popular narrative of North and South. The Norths are a bit of a mix between World War I and World War II Germans and Cold War Russians. They're very clearly the baddies, but it's made clear that just because our protagonists are Southers, that doesn't automatically make them the goodies. The South developed the genetic infantrymen, soldiers that are grown in tanks and genetically engineered to be able to survive in this toxic atmosphere. You know, they can breathe the air, they can swim in the water, and that way they can fight without the need for all this specialist equipment. They're also functionally immortal. When a trooper dies, their consciousness is downloaded into a microchip, and if that chip is then taken back to Souther Command, they can download the GI's memories and personality into a new clone body. They can keep fighting indefinitely, which is like very Warhammer, very grimdarky. but it makes them essentially the perfect soldier. Or at least they would have been if they weren't all wiped out on their first deployment. This became known as the Quartz Zone Massacre. Rogue manages to retrieve the dog chips of 3 of his dead comrades, Helm, Gunnar and Bagman, and he sticks them into his helmet, his gun and his bag. I'm given to believe the names are purely coincidental. The chips remain conscious, so his 3 mates can live on inside of his war gear. They can operate themselves autonomously, which means his gun can fire by itself, stuff like that. But also, they can keep him company too, which is good because Rogue goes AWOL to hunt down the Souther rat who sold out his unit. It's wild stuff, and it's such a good setup for a science fiction war story. There's a little bit of Apocalypse Now in here, a little bit of the outlaw Josie Wales. It has taken me a lot longer to explain the setup for Rogue Trooper than Jerry Finley Day does. He manages this in like 2 panels in the first issue, and that is why he is the master storyteller and I am merely a humble YouTuber. A lot like the early Judge Dredd stories, the early Rogue Trooper stories are these quick one-shots which are over and done in about 4 to 5 pages each. Stuff like the clash in Doomsday Valley, where we see Rogue fighting a Naught Black Mare tank, a supermassive war machine capable of wiping out entire squadrons with one blast of its mega cannon. But by using his brain, Rogue is able to make himself into a one-man army, with Gunnar providing covering fire, with Bagman running interference. Rogue then climbs to the top of the tank, pops the lid, and just chokes all the Nords inside with the toxic atmosphere of New Earth. This is your classic sort of Rogue Trooper one and done. But again, just like Dredd, as the series rolled on, the creators started making longer and longer multi-part serials which would span several weeks in the comic. In the Ascent to Buzzard 3, told across Progs 236 to 238 with art by Colin Wilson, Rogue ambushes a Naught convoy because he's heard that there is a Naught admiral who has information on the traitor. At the end of the first strip, Rogue discovers that the traitor is in fact a general in Souther High Command, and it turns out that he's stationed at Buzzard 3, a low-orbital tactical satellite, and so the next issue sees Rogue infiltrating a rocket ship to fly up to Buzzard 3. Colin Wilson's art is so much more bombastic, so much less ordered and more chaotic than Dave Gibbons. This obviously isn't knocking Dave Gibbons. It's so great to see different artists working on this book. His action sequences are just fantastic. They're so frenetic. And his faces, they're just pure chef kiss. Once he's on board, Rogue faces the generals and he reveals that one amongst you is a traitor. But before an investigation can be launched, the Naughts launch missiles on the satellite. It was a Naught trap. One of these generals is the traitor, and there's no time to figure out which one. As soon as they all run into their individual escape pods, they jettison the space station, and they all start blowing up one by one. Turns out they've all been sabotaged. There's nobody left alive who knows the secret of the traitor general. The traitor general escapes, but so does Rogue, and now he has a better idea of who the traitor is, and so he's hot on the trail. I really like this as a little 3-parter. I think it's got some incredible pathos for the character. Rogue Trooper on paper sounds like he's designed to be something soulless, a mindless genetic automaton, brainwashed into loyalty, pressed into service, that kind of thing. Those are the images that come to mind when I think about clone troopers and futuristic super soldiers. But very much like the clones in Star Wars, throughout the story we see Rogue displaying the highest forms of humanity, loyalty and duty to his friends and to his allies. He's motivated to do what's right, not just to follow orders, but to do what's right. Something which science fiction does really well, and which I think comic books in particular do really, really well, is taking big, complex real-world issues and abstracting them into stories which we have an easier time talking about. Not everybody wants to talk about Israel or Palestine. Not everybody feels that they are qualified to talk about that. And people are worried about hurting one another's feelings. But pretty much universally, we can all have a conversation about whether or not Magneto was right. Deep Space Nine gave me the vocabulary to talk about occupation and colonialism. Civil War, the comic, not the film, gave me the framework to understand security, civil liberties, authoritarianism, growing up in a post 9/11 world. Team Cap since 06, baby. This is something that JFD has done throughout his entire career. I don't think this is just both sidesing, but I think what he does is he shows us that you can have virtuous people among the ranks of the baddies, and you can have real shitheads amongst the ranks of the goodies. Rogue Trooper is a morally questionable story that reminds you that your protagonist is not automatically a good guy. The first really long, multi-part epic story delves into telling a much bleaker picture of the horrors of war and really establishes Rogue Trooper as a real contender for a science fiction war epic, and that is 1982's All Hell on the Dixie Front. All Hell on the Dixie Front was written by Jerry Finley Day with art by Colin Wilson, Cam Kennedy, and Brett Ewins. The story is told over 11 progs, from 266 to 277. It digs a lot further into the American Civil War theme. The term Dix-I gets its name from the Mason-Dixon line, which was essentially a cultural border drawn across a map. It's not particularly accurate. It's a very fluid way of essentially just kind of going, yeah, these people up here prefer Donkey Kong and these people prefer Dixie Kong. The story opens with there having been no reported Naught movement for a long time. A general amnesty is called by the South, which means that Rogue is welcomed home. He's no longer a Rogue Trooper. He's allowed to come back and debrief and bring his friends with him. But it was a trap. We see Naught Troopers coming from the air, from the sea, with these brand new specialised shock troops specifically designed for this offensive. Each new strip gives us a new horror that we get to watch unfold on the page, new and disturbing ways for soldiers to die on this horrible poison death world. Cam Kennedy's artwork is on another level. Cam is one of my all-time favourite artists. You might have seen his work in Star Wars Dark Empire, or that Boba Fett comic that was written by John Wagner. You might even have seen his work in one of my favourite comics of all time, The Light and Darkness War. He just has such staggering talent. He is just on his own level. He stands completely alone. Don't get me wrong, again, Colin Wilson is great, and Brett Ewins is amazing, especially from this era. If you watch my video on the Dark Judges, you'll hear me gushing about the way he draws Judge Anderson. I really, really like Brett Ewins. But Cam is just incomparable. Jumping ahead now to part 6, we see the South Point Military Academy. We see these green rookies in training, going through their exercises, but we're shown that the Naughts are advancing on this position. The colonel in charge of this academy is intent on marching these boys straight into enemy lines. They still haven't passed basic training, but he just wants to send them to their deaths. His plan is just to march straight at the enemy, playing martial music on the digi-synths like something out of the Napoleonic times. It reminds me of that Clone Wars episode with that one Jedi with the 4 lightsabers who just doesn't value the clones and just wants to throw
wave after wave of my own men at them.
Cam Kennedy drawing these forces coming up over the hill, the tanks, these inky black skies. The scale he achieves here is just so good. He would revisit this in Dark Empire, but these inky blacks and this contrast, it's so grimdark, it's staggering work. Rogue attempts to dissuade this colonel, but essentially he's powerless to watch him march these boys right into the mouth of the Naught forces. He's bellowing orders the entire time. As missile tanks open up on this squadron of recruits, we get to witness nothing short of a massacre. Rogue decides that he can't stand by and watch this happen, so using the chips again, he gets Bagman to loop a signal for the recruits to retreat. Unfortunately, like a lot of war stories though, this one doesn't have a happy ending. After Rogue doubles back to check on the recruits that he rescued, he finds them all dead. They all suffered shrapnel wounds in their suits, which let in the poisoned air. All that effort. And for what? The next part of the story takes part in the Ozark Mountains, a paradise above the chem clouds. There's no need for masks here. This is a peaceful community, completely untouched by the war. I think this is native coded, these people living simple lives, raising livestock, and it has this really idyllic feel, this like moment within this war narrative of just breath. Unfortunately, the Nauts find out that Rogue is there and they invade. Rogue makes the decision that they have to gas the Ozarks. They have to make it like the rest of the planet. The last untouched vista on New Earth, the last bit of innocence snuffed out by a war that has to expand on all fronts and consume everything it touches. Every story you read in Dix-I Front is like this. It is about everything just getting worse and worse. It is a story about how war touches everything, ruins everything, and corrupts everything. Rogue sees this happen so often he realises the only sound move he can make now is just to abandon Dix-I, give it to the North, and just get out. Because by remaining, he's only making this situation worse. The big dramatic finale of this story is a mass evacuation. The South do cede Dix-I to the North. They then cram all of their soldiers into amphibious craft. They're pulling everybody out via sea. It has shades of Dunkirk in here, and I don't think that's an accident. Rogue escapes too. He escapes with the South, but the final page of this story is just Rogue sitting there dealing with the fact that his side lost. This wasn't a victory. Like so many other Rogue Trooper stories, this isn't a happy ending. That's like it. You're just left sitting in these complex feelings without any real resolution. A lot of Rogue Trooper strips follow this sort of template. Rogue will be hot on the heels of the Traitor General. He'll have a hot new tip, but it will turn out to be a fake out, or it will turn out to be a trap. He won't get the resolution that he wants. It has that Incredible Hulk TV show energy, you know, like David Banner would find out about some new evidence or some new scientist who can help him stop being the Hulk, but by the end of the episode, like, the evidence has been destroyed or the guy dies or whatever, and he never quite gets what he needs. It has that. In my opinion, the best thing a story can do is finish. And Rogue Trooper, like a lot of Jerry Finley Day work, does actually have a definitive ending. Rogue actually finds the Traitor General. It has closure. I'm not going to go into that now. Maybe that's something for a future video. But 2000 AD have continued making Rogue Trooper stories like throughout the years. Sporadically they'll make a little mini-series, but almost always these stories are fit somewhere in the original Jerry Finley Day run. So it is just a little episode that you didn't know about that happens while Rogue is looking for the Traitor General. There was a brief sort of sequel to Rogue Trooper in the 90s, but this was like set on a completely different planet. It was about a completely different GI. Surprising nobody, I really like this 90s comic, but it is the Jerry Finley Day stuff, the stuff with Rogue, Helm, Gunnar and Bagman hunting down the Traitor General. That's the Rogue Trooper which people talk about. That's the one in the film. Rogue Trooper was actually my favourite 2000 AD character growing up. Not least probably because he was blue. There's something just so strange and esoteric about that. I couldn't help but love it. But if you like big epic science fiction shows like The Clone Wars, or if you like tight dramatic war dramas with little bits of grey morality, stuff like Band of Brothers, then I think you're going to get something out of Rogue Trooper. Just like Judge Dredd, all of the original issues of Rogue Trooper are available in a lot of different formats. There's the original progs, which I never really recommend trying to track down. Newsprint doesn't age very well. These comics really aren't that easy to read after 40 years. They were colorized and reformatted into a US size by Eagle in the 1980s, and there have been like a ton of collections over the years from Titan and so on. They were also published more recently as Rogue Trooper Classics by IDW, this time with all the work digitally coloured by Adrian Salmon. The Essential Rogue Trader books by Rebellion cherry pick a few stories from the run to tell a specific self-contained narrative, and these are digitally coloured by Charlie Kirchhoff. These are really good if you just want to get, you know, a small curated experience of Rogue Trooper without having to commit to reading everything. If you do want to read everything, then you've got two options. The New Earth Tales, which is the equivalent to the Judge Dredd Complete Case Files, or we have the brand new Complete Collections from Rebellion. These contain all of the stories that I mentioned in this video and more. This first book has everything up to and including the Finding of the Traitor General. So if you want to read all of Rogue's story, this is it. This is probably going to be in the movie. I don't know. I'll put links in the description for where you can buy these. If you are outside of the UK, you can still request these through your friendly local comic shop. They're with Diamond and all the other distributors. So support local where possible. Go to your local comic shop. Get them in. If you can't afford new comics, don't worry. Having fun isn't hard when you have a library card. Support local, support your libraries. Ring your mum, drink water. That's it. Thank you very much for sitting through another comic book video. If you like 2000 AD, British comics, European comics, or just other weird, grimdark stuff, then check out my previous uploads. If you'd like to support the channel and see your name here at the end of the video, there are links in the description as to how you can support me through YouTube memberships and through Patreon. Special shout out to The Crawl, who is a member of the shout out tier, so you get your name read out at the end of the video. You're fucking awesome. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope you had a good time. I'll see you again in the next video. Until then, ta-da.